We're here at St Paul's Cathedral in London, from where the Occupy the London Stock Exchange movement was fairly recently evicted. The movement appears, from where I'm standing, to be on its last legs. But luckily, Jamie Kelsey-Fry from Occupy London is here to convince me otherwise. Jamie, thanks for talking to us today. Now, you said yourself, and I sort of feel it too, that this place is almost haunted. The tents used to be right there just where you're standing. Is the Occupy movement dead?
Absolutely not, obviously. One of the things of the camp moving is that we're allowed to put a lot more energy into the movement itself. It was actually becoming very difficult to sustain the camp because it became very large. If you bear in mind that 5 months ago none of us thought the camp would last this long, we're still developing our ideas on how to move forward, how to use outreach to escalate the movement, to generate solidarity, and other ways really of reaching into the public consciousness to get across our very simple ideas of social, environmental and economic justice. So we've only just begun in that sense, really.
It's no coincidence that we are here in one of the financial hearts of London. The London Stock Exchange is not very far away from here at all. Bankers are still being paid their bonuses, as we hear about in the newspapers every day. The 1% appears very much to be still in charge. Have you had any impact at all?
Absolutely. I think that there's been some measures by the government, because we had such an influence on the public view of the financial system, that there has been, you know, a leading banker who's had to turn down his bonus, and Sir Fred was made to turn back his knighthood, etc. But I think that these are just palliative measures. I think they show that the government realise that there's a lot of public support for the issues that we're raising awareness about. And so they've taken some measures to make it look as if they're doing something. But you're absolutely right. In terms of the 1% remaining the 1%, that's completely untouched. Also, if you bear in mind the fact that last year, of the 100 top FTSE, the average pay rise was 49%. Everything is business as usual, you're absolutely right. But what's different is people are now aware about this. People are now entering this dialogue, and they're beginning to challenge the assumptions that haven't been challenged for a very, very long period of time, which is that can we continue with such an unsustainable, undemocratic, unjust economic system?
So far, Occupy looks kind of like a sort of open-air party for people who have something to lose. What are people in the movement willing to sacrifice in order to achieve their goals?
It's a very interesting question. Actually, people are sacrificing their jobs, their relationships, not by intention. Many people have lost their homes. I've never been in a movement where people are that dedicated. The general portrayal of us as being people who are, you know, jobless, on the dole, losers, is absolutely the opposite to the reality. The reality is that a whole span of people from across the general public have been motivated to dedicate themselves 100% to this movement. Now, this means that a very small proportion of us are actually experienced activists, and by far the highest amount of us are people who are just from ordinary walks of life, who've gone that I want to make a stand. We have to do something about this unsustainable system, and this is the movement for us to do that in.
It's 5 months now since you came to this area. Let's talk a bit about your goals. A lot of people seem to have a very limited understanding of what you're actually trying to achieve here. Just take me through it.
Okay, when we took this space on October the 15th, over a period of 48 hours, around about 3,500 people took part in generating what was called our initial statement. So really within 48 hours we made it very clear why we were here. So let's go through some of the more obvious ones. We are questioning what we see as an unsustainable economic system, an undemocratic economic system, a political system that seems to be working with profits before people. It's intertwined with the corporations. We also question the idea of regulatory bodies being managed by the people they're meant to be regulating. We also question the idea that perpetual war for resources is something that's going to destroy the planet. So we made it very clear. We nailed our ideas to the wall, you know, within 48 hours. An economic system based on infinite growth, but which relies on finite resources, is frankly absolutely embarrassing.
Well, let's broaden it out a bit and talk a little bit about the global economic situation, if you like, through the prism of your movement. The European project is constantly in the papers, and it looks like it's on its last legs. How do you see it playing out?
Well, what we see it as, when I say we, I mean I'm speaking I as a member of Occupy, but it's very clear from the movement from the beginning that the economic system is on its last legs, the global economic system is on its last legs. About 9 months ago now, we had a leading trader on BBC News Live who said very clearly that governments don't rule the world, Goldman Sachs does. So it's very clear to us that What's happening in Europe, what's happening in Greece, is just a symptom of this disease, and this disease is going to continue to get worse unless we actually, as people, as a grassroots movement, actually take control ourselves of this economic system that's been run by very few people, and it's just run completely out of control. What's very frightening about this gentleman who was saying that Goldman Sachs rules the world is he was reveling in it. He apologised for it, but he was reveling in it because he said, if you understand this situation, you will know how to make a huge amount of money out of the global collapse. Now, for any human being to be in a situation where they can benefit hugely by massive yachts from the suffering of the millions and millions in the world, we should be embarrassed of being part of that same human race. And we should be embarrassed if we sit by and do nothing about it.
It seems as though a movement like Occupy would be in support of bailouts of countries like Greece. I'm thinking about sort of solidarity with workers, that kind of thing.
Very interesting question. I'm not the Occupy movement, I'm one person in it. But actually, I'm not sure that the movement would support bailing out. Now, exactly where we're standing at the moment was the famous Tent City University, and we had an evening of solidarity with Greece. And there was about 50 Greek people rammed in here, and it was a fascinating night. And they kept going back to a very interesting point. We are in a third world war, and it's an economic war, and the weapon is debt. And that was a fascinating thing to say, a very revolutionary phrase. Now, I think the movement is moving more towards a revolutionary solution to the situation we're in, rather than a reformist. But there's still a lot of balance between the two, but I think it slightly sways on revolutionary. Now, if you look at revolutionary, it's much more to do with the idea of dispensing with organisations like the IMF, dispensing with all these organisations that have ruled and regulated the way the finance of the world is run, because we believe them to be completely corrupt, completely in the pockets of the people they're meant to be regulating and ruling over. And the same with governments. They're completely intertwined with all these financial decisions. They have an ear for corporations, they have an ear for global financial institutions, much, much more than they have an ear for the people of the country they're meant to be looking after and supporting. So in the situation of what's happening in Greece and them coming out with this statement, the Third World War is here, and it's an economic war, and their weapon is debt, that really rang a bell with a lot of people. If you look at Iceland, now there's something that's quite inspiring, in the sense that they absolutely ignored what they were being told to do. They didn't go for being bailed out in any way. In fact, at the moment, they're crowdsourcing their constitution themselves. They dispense with all the leaders they believed to be corrupt and were banging their saucepans, just like in Argentina, until they had a leader they believed in. And they're going much further. They're actually now chasing and wanting to bring to court those bankers who brought their country into debt in the first place. So they've taken control themselves, and they're doing very, very well indeed.
Can that sort of crowdsourcing really work on a national and international scale, though?
Yes. Now, in terms of a national scale with Iceland, they're simply crowdsourcing their constitution themselves, and it is managing well. Digital technology has absolutely revolutionised this species, and it's certainly revolutionised the way that we move towards radical change and activism. And it's only just started. So the fact is that, yeah, I can see in the future, within our lifetimes, a situation whereby there's a form of global referendum that's due to digital technology. If we have that, I think very quickly the leaders and the people who run the financial institutions and the corporations will be put to shame. Because when they hear the voice of literally the 99% of the planet, was the 99.9% really, then they will be put to shame. They'll be put into the shade, and ideally they'll go.
Governments in various countries are obviously opposed to you occupying places, and you were evicted from here on a court order. The US has reportedly rolled out what it's calling a microwave weapon to disperse crowds. Are you making plans for dealing with those kinds of technologies?
This country has, apparently last year, they bought a large water cannon to dispense with demonstrators or activists, and I think that's kind of a scare story. I know it's true that the military in the States may have bought this weapon that can use sound waves to kind of disempower people who may be in the streets, but I think that's a symptom of something far worse that's coming. Occupy is the canary in the mine as far as we can see, but eventually the rest of this world will realise that they've been robbed and that they are being put into subjugation by completely unjust, undemocratic, unsustainable financial systems. And they will all as one become furious eventually. So I think those kind of weapons may well be something to take much more seriously in, say, 6 months' time or 8 months' time. In this country, the austerity measures haven't really hit as hard as they're going to. So already it's easy for people to just stay within their own little bubble, if you don't mind the word, But when the austerity measures cut into their actual lives, comes right into their doorstep and in through their front door and cuts them away from the life that they're used to, then I think that there'll be an enormous growth in people who are trying to find this kind of economic justice that Occupy represent.
And briefly, Jamie, what's the future for Occupy?
It's very, very bright indeed. The future of the Occupy movement is escalation and solidarity. In other words, that we will continue to generate more creative ways of bringing across our message, using direct action and using ways of using the media, but also we will create more and more solidarity. That is, more and more people will come and join us when they realise that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet here.